Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring the Hadith,
The Hadith.
specifically
Yes,
Sahih al-Bukhari,
that's right.
a text many consider to be the most important collection
Yeah.
of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and actions,
Right.
second only to the Quran itself in Sunni Islam.
Absolutely.
It's like a window into the Prophet's life and teachings, but it's also sparked quite a bit of debate over the centuries.
Of course. And we're going to be using a YouTube video as a guide called The History of Sahih al-Bukhari and Its Authenticity
Okay.
by this channel correctional officer.
So for those who might not know,
Okay.
what exactly are hadiths and why are they so important in Islam?
Hadiths are essentially records of the Prophet Muhammad's words and deeds,
Okay.
passed down through chains of narrators.
Okay.
Think of them as a kind of oral history, later compiled into written collections.
Right.
For Sunni Muslims, they provide a framework for interpreting the Quran and navigating daily life in accordance with the Prophet's example.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the man
Yes.
behind Sahih al-Bukhari,
Okay.
Imam Bukhari.
Imam Bukhari.
He wasn't exactly a contemporary of the Prophet.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Imam Bukhari was born in the year 194
Okay.
after the Hijrah, which marks the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina.
Right.
That means he lived well over a century after the Prophet's death.
Right.
It's fascinating to consider how he approached the task of collecting these sayings from a bygone era.
Yeah, it's like trying to piece together a puzzle with pieces scattered across time and space.
Such a great analogy.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
What do we know about Imam Bukhari's life?
Okay.
What kind of person was he?
He led a remarkable life,
Okay.
full of challenges and dedication to knowledge.
Okay.
Born in Bukhara, which is in present-day Uzbekistan,
Right.
he was orphaned at a young age.
Wow.
He even suffered from a childhood illness that almost left him blind.
Oh, wow.
But his thirst for knowledge was unquenchable.
Yeah.
By the age of 16, he had already memorized the entire Quran and thousands of hadiths.
Wow. Talk about a driven scholar.
Absolutely.
You can really see how that meticulousness would be crucial when you're dealing with sacred texts.
Yeah.
So what prompted him to take on this monumental task of compiling Sahih al-Bukhari?
Well, the story goes that his teacher, a prominent scholar named Ishaq ibn Rahway,
Okay.
recognized Bukhari's deep understanding of hadith
Okay.
and suggested he create a collection of only the most authentic sayings of the Prophet. This suggestion seems to have ignited a passion in Bukhari.
So he sets off on this incredible journey
Yeah.
to find these sayings.
Yes.
How long did this take him? And how many hadiths did he actually collect?
He traveled for 16 years,
Wow.
gathering hadiths from various teachers and scholars across the Islamic world.
Okay.
By the time he finished,
Right.
he had amassed a collection of over 600,000 hadiths.
That's an incredible number.
Yes.
But he didn't include all of those
Right.
in Sahih al-Bukhari, did he?
No, he was very selective.
Right.
He meticulously evaluated each hadith using a set of criteria he developed to ensure authenticity.
Okay.
This process, which he developed himself,
Right.
resulted in him choosing 7,275 hadiths to include in his Sahih.
Oh, hold on. So these criteria weren't like divinely revealed
That's right.
or something?
Yeah.
He came up with them himself.
Exactly. That's actually a point of contention
Oh.
for some critics of hadith.
Okay.
Corey's standards, while rigorous,
Yeah.
were ultimately his own interpretations, not directly from the Quran or the Prophet.
Right.
This raises questions about human subjectivity and the potential for error or bias.
That's a really interesting point.
It is an important point.
So it was essentially his scholarly judgment that determined which hadiths made the cut.
Yes.
What kind of criteria did he use?
So he focused on evaluating the chain of narrators
Okay.
for each hadith. He looked for individuals known for their piety,
Right.
integrity,
Yeah.
and accuracy in transmitting information.
Okay.
He also examined the content of the hadith itself,
Okay.
looking for consistency with the Quran and other established teachings.
Gotcha.
It was a meticulous process, almost like a historian or journalist, fact-checking sources to ensure reliability.
So he really approached this like a detective trying to get to the truth.
Absolutely.
We've talked about his dedication, but are there any stories that illustrate just how seriously he took this task?
There's a famous story
Yeah.
that he had a dream
Okay.
in which he was protecting the Prophet Muhammad from flies.
Interesting.
He interpreted this dream as a divine sign,
Okay.
instructing him to compile Sahih al-Bukhari
Right.
to safeguard the Prophet's teachings from being corrupted by falsehoods.
Wow, that's quite a powerful image.
Yeah.
You can see how that would solidify his commitment to the project.
Absolutely.
But we also mentioned earlier that there's some controversy surrounding Sahih al-Bukhari. Where does that come from?
Well, even though Sahih al-Bukhari is considered the most authentic Hadith collection in Sunni Islam,
Right.
its authority has been debated for centuries.
Okay.
Some critics argue that hadiths,
Yes.
compiled by humans long after the Quran's revelation,
Right.
are inherently less reliable than the divine word of God.
That makes sense. It's like the difference between reading a first-hand account of an event versus hearing it through the grapevine generations later.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And even among scholars who accept the importance of hadith,
Right.
there are disagreements.
Okay.
For instance, Imam al-Albani,
Okay.
another respected scholar,
Yeah.
reviewed Sahih al-Bukhari and rejected some of the hadiths Bukhari had accepted.
So even within the tradition,
Yes.
there are varying opinions on which hadiths are truly authentic.
That's right.
The YouTuber we're focusing on takes this critique even further, right?
Yeah.
He questions the need for hadith altogether.
That's right. He argues that the Quran revealed to the Prophet Muhammad is complete and self-sufficient.
Okay.
He cites verses like Quran 5.3, which states that God perfected the religion for believers,
Right.
implying that nothing further is needed.
That's a bold statement.
It is.
He's essentially saying that Sahih al-Bukhari,
Right.
despite its importance to many Muslims, adds information that's not essential
That's his perspective.
and might even contradict the Quran.
That's his perspective.
Yeah.
He believes that focusing solely on the Quran
Okay.
is the purest and most accurate way to understand Islam, and he backs up his argument
Right.
by pointing out places where hadiths seem to clash with each other
Okay.
or with the Quran itself.
Ooh, conflicts and contradictions. This is where it gets really juicy.
It does get very interesting.
What are some examples of these inconsistencies?
One example revolves around the Prophet's instructions
Okay.
on whether his sayings should be written down
Okay.
in Sahih Muslim 3004.
Good.
There's a hadith where the Prophet forbids writing anything other than the Quran,
Okay, so no written record besides the Quran. Pretty straightforward, right?
except that another hadith describes an incident on the Prophet's deathbed
Okay.
where he wanted to write something down for his followers. But because arguments broke out in the room,
Yeah.
he was prevented from doing so.
So in one hadith, he forbids writing.
Right.
But in another, he desires to write something important that does seem a bit contradictory.
Right, and the YouTuber sees this as evidence that perhaps not all hadiths should be taken at face value.
Right.
He believes these inconsistencies highlight the potential for human error or even deliberate alterations over time.
This is fascinating. It seems we've just scratched the surface of this debate now. I'm really curious to hear how this YouTuber applies this Quran-centric approach to other core tenets of Islam.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, I think we need a moment to let all of this sink in. All right, let's unpack some more of this YouTuber's perspective. He claims that the Quran already provides all the necessary details for prayer, salat, right?
That's correct.
He even cites specific verses
Yes, he does.
to support his point.
Yeah.
Right.
He points to verses like Quran 19.5859
Okay.
and 17.107.10, which describe actions like standing, reciting versus bowing and prostrating.
Right.
He believes these verses provide a sufficient framework for understanding the essence of prayer.
But what about the 5 pillars of Islam?
Yes.
That's a pretty foundational concept for Muslims.
Right.
And they're not explicitly mentioned in the Quran, are they?
That's one of the key points the YouTuber raises. The 5 pillars: declaration of faith, shahada, prayer, salat, charity, zakat, fasting, psalm, and pilgrimage, Hajj,
Right.
are indeed derived primarily from hadith, not directly from the Quranic text.
Okay.
He sees this as further evidence that reliance on hadith might have led to practices
Right.
not directly mandated by God.
So how does he reconcile his Quran-central view with the 5 pillars? Does he just disregard them completely?
Not exactly. He engages with these concepts, but interprets them
Okay.
through a Quranic lens, sometimes offering alternative understandings.
Interesting.
For example, he talks about zakat, usually understood as charity. He agrees with the concept of giving to those in need,
Okay.
but emphasizes the Quranic idea that zakat is primarily about purifying one's soul.
So it's not just about the outward act of giving money
Right.
or goods,
Yeah.
but about the internal state of the giver?
Precisely. It's about recognizing that true charity stems from a place of sincere devotion to God
Okay.
and a desire to cleanse one's heart from greed and attachment to worldly possessions.
That's a fascinating distinction.
Mhm.
What about Hajj,
Yeah,
the pilgrimage to Mecca?
right.
Does he advocate skipping that pillar altogether?
He doesn't dismiss the significance of visiting the Kaaba and performing the core rituals of Hajj,
Okay.
which are mentioned in the Quran.
Right.
However, he questions some of the specific practices that have evolved over time, like kissing the black stone.
Interesting.
He sees those as later additions,
Right.
not explicitly mandated in the Quran, and potentially distracting from the spiritual essence of Hajj.
So he's encouraging people to critically examine the layers of tradition
Yes.
that have built up around these practices.
That's right.
And to focus on the core principles
Mhm.
outlined in the Quran.
Exactly. It's about peeling back those layers and rediscovering the purity of intention and submission to God
Okay.
that he believes should be at the heart of Islamic practice.
It seems like he's really pushing back against what he sees as an overemphasis on outward rituals.
Absolutely. This emphasis on inner transformation over outward actions is a recurring theme.
Yeah.
It even extends to his understanding of the Shahada,
Okay.
the
Yeah.
declaration of faith.
Most Muslims understand that as reciting the phrase, "There is no God but Allah," and Muhammad is his messenger.
Yes.
Does he have a different take on it?
He acknowledges the importance of affirming the oneness of God and recognizing Muhammad as his messenger.
Okay.
But he suggests that true Shahada
Right.
is less about reciting a phrase
Yeah.
and more about a complete and utter submission of one's will to God.
So it's about an internal state of surrender
Yes,
and alignment with God's will rather than just a verbal declaration.
that's the essence of his argument.
Okay.
He believes that true faith is reflected in our actions and the constant striving to purify our intentions,
Yeah.
not merely in outward pronouncements.
Okay.
This focus on inner transformation also influences his perspective on burial practices.
Burial practices. What's his take on those?
He points out that while many cultures, including those with Islamic traditions,
Yeah.
have developed elaborate burial rituals,
Right.
the Quran doesn't prescribe specific rites for burying the dead.
Okay.
He sees this as further evidence
Right.
that outward rituals shouldn't be the primary focus.
So he's essentially saying that how we live our lives matters more than the ceremonies performed
Right.
after our death.
That's right. He emphasizes that our deeds and the state of our hearts are what truly matter.
Yeah.
When we face God, he reminds us that we should be more concerned with living a life of righteousness and devotion
Right.
than with the rituals performed after we're gone.
This is really making me think about the balance between inner faith
Yeah.
and outward expressions of that faith.
It's a complex issue.
It is.
It is.
What else does he focus on in his critique?
Well, one of his more controversial arguments
Okay.
revolves around the common phrase, Allahu Akbar,
Okay.
often translated as God is great.
That phrase is used so frequently in Muslim prayer and daily life.
Yes, it's very common.
It's almost a reflex for many.
Yeah.
What's his issue with it?
He contends that adding Akbar, which means greater, implies a comparison with other deities,
Okay.
suggesting that there might be other beings to whom God is being compared.
So he's saying that even though Islam is strictly monotheistic,
Yes,
the use of Akbar could inadvertently imply the existence of other gods?
that's his point.
Interesting.
He suggests that Allahu Gir, meaning God is great, without the comparative element,
Okay.
would be a more accurate reflection of Islamic monotheism.
That's a really subtle linguistic point,
It is.
but I can see how it could spark a lot of debate. It makes you think about the evolution of language
Right.
and interpretation within religious traditions.
Absolutely. It highlights how even seemingly simple phrases can carry layers of meaning
Yeah.
and interpretation that can shift over time.
This is getting really deep now. I'm super curious to hear what he has to say about other aspects of Islamic theology,
Yeah.
like the revelation of the Quran. But before we get into that, let's pause here for a moment and let all of these thought-provoking ideas sink in.
Okay.
So before the break, we were talking about this YouTuber's unique perspective on Islam.
Right.
And I'm really curious to hear what he says about the revelation of the Quran.
Okay.
It wasn't revealed all at once, was it?
That's right. The Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad gradually
Okay.
over a period of about 23 years.
23 years.
Okay, this gradual revelation is actually addressed in the Quran itself.
Oh, interesting. Which verse is that?
He points to Quran 25.32,
Okay.
where God says that the revelation was spread out over time to strengthen the prophet's heart
Okay.
and make it easier for him to convey the message to his people.
Right.
It's a concept that many traditional scholars have discussed over the centuries.
So he's not really challenging the traditional understanding of how the Quran was revealed.
Not in that sense, no.
Okay, but he does go on to offer a unique interpretation of a specific chapter, right?
Yes, he delves into Surah Masad,
Okay.
a very short chapter in the Quran.
Okay.
Traditionally, it's been interpreted as a condemnation of an individual who opposed the prophet.
Right.
This YouTuber, however, proposes that the figure being condemned in the surah is actually Iblis,
Okay.
the Islamic equivalent of Satan.
Wow, that's a pretty significant departure from the traditional interpretation.
It is.
What leads him to that conclusion?
He bases his interpretation on a close reading of the Arabic text
Okay.
and a broader understanding of the Quran's themes.
Right.
He believes his interpretation aligns more closely with the overall message of the Quran, which emphasizes the ongoing struggle between good and evil,
Yeah.
represented by God and Iblis.
So he's essentially reinterpreting a whole chapter of the Quran
In a way, yeah.
based on his own understanding of the text. And its broader context, it really highlights his emphasis on individual engagement
Yeah.
with the Quran and his willingness to question long-held interpretations.
Absolutely. It definitely shows a bold approach to scriptural interpretation.
Yeah.
But, it's important to remember that he's presenting his own perspective,
Right.
which is not universally accepted within the Muslim community.
And of course, and that's what makes this whole discussion so fascinating.
Yes.
We've been exploring Imam Bukhari's meticulous compilation of the Prophet's sayings,
Right.
the complexities of Hadith, and this YouTuber's thought-provoking, Quran-centric perspective. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
So what are some of the key takeaways
Well,
that you think our listeners should consider from all of this?
first and foremost, I think this deep dive reveals the incredible depth and diversity of thought within Islam.
Okay.
Even on seemingly fundamental issues like the role of Hadith,
Yeah.
there's room for different interpretations and perspectives.
It's a reminder that engaging with one's faith is an ongoing process of learning, questioning, and refining one's understanding.
Right.
What else stands out to you?
Well, this discussion highlights the importance of critical thinking, especially when encountering religious texts.
Yeah.
Whether it's Imam Bukhari carefully evaluating the chains of narration for each hadith,
All right.
or this YouTuber challenging traditional interpretations.
Yeah.
It's crucial to approach these texts with a discerning mind.
It's about not blindly accepting anything at face value, but rather engaging with the material thoughtfully
Yes.
and coming to our own conclusions. And in this case, the central question seems to be, what is the role of Hadith in understanding and practicing Islam today?
That is the question, isn't it?
If the Quran is considered the ultimate source of guidance for Muslims, where do Hadiths fit in?
Right.
Are they essential companions to the Quran, offering valuable insights into the Prophet's life and teachings?
Yeah.
Or are they potentially problematic, prone to human error, and possibly leading to practices not rooted in the Quran?
Big questions.
Those are questions each listener will have to grapple with on their own.
Yeah,
Based on their own study and reflection, we've presented you with a range of perspectives today.
we have.
But ultimately, the most important journey is the one you take within your own heart and mind.
Very well said.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Hadith and Sahih al-Bukhari. It's been a fascinating journey.
It has.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.